invite Mr. Chandra and Ms. Jauhar for a brief discussion on some of the points that the Honorable Minister has raised and some issues which are very close to the heart of both our next speakers. So, Mr. Chandra, I'm going to put you on the spot first, since and you can thank the minister for that. He said you should be able to tell us about all the progress that has been made in terms of the ease of business and creating a better environment for the currently producing companies, oil and gas producing companies in India. So what's your view on that?
Thank you so much. Let me start with the upstream. Now, the reform process in India is necessarily incremental, except for the big bang reforms that were done on the 18th of October 2014. Now, the first thing in the upstream that was done is that the realization that NELP, with its production sharing contract model, it's still not yielded anything significant except for the gas discovery in the KG Basin, as far as production goes. So the first step was to junk the production sharing contract model with all its problems, led to plenty of arbitration and litigations, and move to a revenue sharing model. The next step was the open acreage licensing policy, and moving from the revenue sharing model to the royalty tax model for all basins except category 1. And perhaps the time has now come to carry forward that process and extend the royalty tax model to category 1 basins also. When a lot of small companies come in, then you need an ecosystem. This is how the shale gas industry developed in the US. You need a lot of service providers. That is slowly developing. But the biggest reform on the 18th of October was deregulating diesel. The test of reforms is how it's withstood through time. The under recovery in the previous year was 90,000 crore on diesel alone. So you got rid of that under recovery. It's become a huge source of revenue for you, which has helped to handle the fiscal deficit. And in spite of the high prices, the government has had the courage not to roll it back. There was a lot of fear that it would be rolled back. So all that I'm saying is that a lot of decisions have been taken. Leadership is all about taking risks and courage. Now, the time is to carry it forward, and carry it forward especially in the nomination fields, for the simple reason that 71% of your crude oil production and 83% of your gas production comes from there. Now, what can you do there? What can you do for crude oil there? I mean, for example, crude oil, maybe for incremental production over last year's production, you can waive the cess off. You can give concessions on the royalty from offshore areas, because that is within the remit of the government of India. For gas, you can allow a certain percentage to be marketed free, to be traded on the exchange. See, gas exchange has to be developed on something on the lines of the national balancing point of UK, which has LNG, which has North Sea gas, which has gas from all over the continent. So finally, the gas exchange will be the answer for gas and gas competition.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more on the reforms in removing fuel subsidies. And I've looked at this issue quite a bit, studied the fuel subsidies, not just in India, but elsewhere. In a lot of Southeast Asian countries are still under the burden of that. So absolutely, I agree with you that some of the reforms that have been done in the downstream sector have been quite spectacular. And I take your point, Mr. Chandra, that in India, I think one just needs to be patient that reforms are incremental. I do appreciate that it's a huge machinery, and it takes time to, or shall I say, a big ship, and it takes time to change direction. Um, Ms. Jauhar, if I may just bring you in on the topic of natural gas, and the minister spoke quite a bit about creating a gas-based economy in India. What to your mind are the main challenges in India's transition to natural gas, and what are some of the areas that you would say it needs to tackle first? Like, what would be the order? There's of course there's infrastructure, there's gas exchange, there's LNG imports that need to be secured if the country is going to use more gas. So you could tell us a little bit about challenges and in which order do you think they should be tackled? You have to unmute yourself.
Thank you. Thanks, Vandana. Thanks to the Swarajya magazine to have IHS Marketeer and myself. Coming to the natural gas sector in India, I think, in many ways, the decade up to 2030 will be a defining decade. And the reason I say that is, I think many of the policy changes, many of the market push, many of the infrastructure framework that has been put into place up to now is going to begin to yield results in the 2030s. And if I just start saying, we're going to see more domestic gas production come online, and a lot of that is due to a lot of the policy changes that Honorable Minister spoke about, Mr. Saurabh Chandra spoke about, wherein we're actually going to have new deep water gas come on stream back to back literally in the next 3 years, which is significant. And that gas will constitute a significant part of India's demand, India's production as well, in the range of about 10 to 25%. So I think that is very significant to recognize. Then we see all these new pipelines which are now in the process of being laid. That's the hard infrastructure coming to place. So you have the molecules coming, you have the hard infrastructure coming. You also have new market mechanisms, which is the gas exchange. Now, the gas exchange is, I would say, really in its initial days right now. And so that it becomes the NBP, which, Mr. Chandra alluded to, I think what would be needed is a real coming together through trust between the producers and the consumers, because in a market, that trust is very important between the producers and consumers. And I think that the beginnings have been made. I mean, the India Gas Exchange has a market advisory committee, and it is fascinating to see that you actually, in that market advisory committee, you have all the producers and consumers represented, and the transporters and the marketers of, and some of the city gas companies, and you have, ceramic companies, plus companies. So you truly have the makings of a market which is beginning to happen. However, even if you look at, say, the instance of the Henry Hub, which I studied very deeply in the early 90s, which happened in the US, it takes about 5 to 10 years for systems like this to come into place, no matter where you are in the world, because it takes time for all the enabling regulations to come in space. Now, one of the enabling regulations which is coming into effect now as we speak is the new tariff policy, the new gas tariff policy. One of the classic things on the downstream that has challenged the growth of the gas sector has been this whole downstream build-up of the end consumer price in terms of taxation and tariffs. And one aspect, and it's also about how the tariff moves across the different pipelines through a certain pancaking of tariffs. That is going to change now. And I think that itself will shave off in certain pipeline systems anywhere from, $0.50 per MMBTU to about $1 per MMBTU in the ultimate end consumer gas price build-up. I think the thing in that equation, we have the upstream pricing sorted out thanks to the reforms that were alluded to before by the Honorable Minister and Mr. Saurabh Chandra. In the downstream reforms, the tariff part is now sorted and it has to come into, it has to be acted. But the taxation part is yet to be addressed fully. And that gas has to come into the GST framework. And there are certain contractual mechanisms which in a state like Gujarat, certain companies have sort of done high sea sales of LNG and offset some of that consumer price buildup. So I think on the policy front, if that can be addressed, that will be a big game changer. And that now with the new pipeline code and the new tariff policy coming from the PNGRB, the Petroleum and Natural Gas Regulatory Board, what we will see is the possibility for a certain amount of contractual flexibility, the ability to break up gas into smaller parcels for smaller consumers. Exactly. I think that process will begin to unlock in this decade. So I think this decade is a defining decade in that sense. You have all these things, new infrastructure, new terminals, new pipelines, new molecules, LNG, and these enabling regulations and the gas hub all coming together. So I think the impact of this will really start showing up, towards the middle or the second half of the decade, when all of these are more fully in place.
Okay, actually you answered my second question as well. I was going to ask you to. I'm not sure if you heard me. I was going to ask you to look at your crystal ball and say, when do you think a vibrant, fully tradable, fungible gas exchange, gas trade will happen in India? And I suppose what you're saying is
sure.
That sounds to me quite optimistic. So you're saying sometime in the second half of this decade?
Yes. I would say this is a very defining decade. And see, gas used to be at about 11% in the primary energy mix at the start of the 2010-2011 period. So we could see it go back to that level. And if things, if the consumers really pick it up, and I think there's a layer of the energy transition that comes in, that that gas is seen as this cleanest fossil fuel, this transition. And I think that is where there'll be probably an increased adoption also by industries, by different classes of consumers. So the second half of the decade is what my crystal ball suggests, yes.
Okay, sounds good. And just on that point, as India's gas consumption increases, I presume India's gas imports will increase as well. And India has been mostly buying its gas on long-term contracts. Do you see that changing as well? Do you see more of a spot buying of gas starting to emerge as well in India?
Absolutely. I think, there again, whether we look at the global consumer or the Indian consumer, the consuming mindset is one of leveraging the changes in the market conditions. So right now, we are firmly in a buyer's market, and what better than to take advantage of, spot, which went down to $3 an MMBTU, when COVID just hit. And it was fascinating to see the power plants actually switching in some cases voluntarily from, gas was achieving parity very close to coal. So you had a certain switching happening, and gas has certain flexibility benefits also. So those all kicked in the period of March, April, May, and so absolutely. I mean, I think it almost behooves us to take advantage of the global conditions where there's just a lot more gas thanks to the shale, thanks to new centers like Mozambique maybe coming on stream as well. So absolutely.
Yeah, and that surplus is expected to remain for the next several years, I understand. Mr. Chandra, so India has also been upgrading its upstream contracts in a bid to attract more investment into fields that have not so far been explored and developed. But given that a lot of the majors are actually retreating from the fossil fuel business, what prospects do you see for India being able to attract foreign investment upstream? Or do you think it should even continue to be aspirational in that direction, or perhaps look more towards domestic companies in that regard?
If a company can make money, at the end of the day, they'll come in.
Of course.
So perhaps bringing in category 1 basins under the royalty tax regime would make it more attractive. You see, when I'll once again go back to the nomination fields and say that they need cutting edge technology. Now, how do you get cutting edge technology? Now, that is with the international oil companies, the oil majors. Normally, technology rides on FDI. Now, getting FDI into nomination fields is actually a very sensitive subject. One has to find ways to get technology into the nomination fields. It is believed, I don't know whether it's correct or not, that there's another Bombay High below this Bombay High. But you can't do seismic studies because of the basalt layer. So is there a technology which can help you to do seismic studies there? Then when you look at fields, what is it? You see, the government, which is DGH and the ministry, contractors, ONGC, and the operator, they have to work in tandem. There may be differences of opinion, but they should not be converted into disputes. They need to be resolved and resolved quickly. And something else for the pre-NELP. Let's take cess. Cess is normally not levied when there's profit sharing. As is in NELP, it is levied in nomination fields where there is no profit sharing. So an incentive in the form of removal of cess can be built in. And maybe some of this PI can be offloaded to some of these oil majors who can bring in still better technology. So you have to go actually contract regime-wise, and then whatever else has been done till now, you build on it. And Gauri talked about the gas economy, a gas exchange. I have to add a couple of things.
Sure.
One, it will require natural gas to be brought under GST. Two, there has to be open access. Three, a portion of the domestic gas has to be put into the gas exchange. And as things stand today, that can perhaps come from the nomination fields and some of the pre-NELP fields. The nomination fields account for about 83% of the gas production. So that will incentivize the producers and make it vibrant. Because unless there's liquidity on the exchanges, it's not going to work.
Absolutely.
It will be buyers and sellers. And speculators add liquidity, so they'll step in. And then a lot of the crude oil market is courtesy of the speculators. So.
Yes, absolutely. You need volumes, you need a good representation of buyers and sellers and even traders. That's what makes for a good, vibrant exchange. Would you agree with Ms. Jauhar's crystal ball that we can hope to see that sort of an exchange sometime in the second half of this decade?
If these enabling reforms are carried out, maybe earlier. I mean, in another avatar, I chair an exchange, but we haven't yet stepped into gas because we are waiting for these enabling conditions to come in.
Okay. Okay. I think we'll have to leave it over there. Thank you very, very much, Ms. Jauhar and Mr. Chandra, and of course, the Honorable Minister and Mr. Nair. Thank you very much.